Thank you for joining me today on the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. I'm really excited to share this episode with you today with Jessica Jackson because you are going to learn a simple technique that you can implement right away and really see a difference in your day, in the way you think, in the way you act. It's super cool, super simple, and she goes into really why this makes a difference. And so I'm excited for you to learn about this simple idea that will have a big impact. Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and my guest today is Jessica Jackson. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk with you tonight.
Yeah, we're going to have a great conversation today. Let me introduce you to my audience really quick. So Jessica is a homeschooling mother of 3 children and wife to her husband, Andrew. She graduated with a degree in technology and engineering education and has continued to develop her skills in photography, web design, woodworking, and teaching. She's also the host and creator of the Thriving in Motherhood podcast, which I was privileged to be a guest on recently. We had a fun conversation over there. And Jessica's passionate about intentionally cultivating growth in herself and encouraging other mothers in their own journeys of growth. Now, I love that mission, and it just is what I hope to do here on this podcast. And I love it that we're both all about the moms and helping them grow. Jessica loves spending her days outside, reading lots of books, working on projects, taking baby steps on her latest entrepreneurial endeavors, and fiddling while her kids dance and clap along. So like a literal fiddle you play.
Yes.
That's so cool. Okay, that is very fun. I love that little glimpse into you and kind of what you're all about and your family. So I'd love to start off by learning a little bit more about your podcast and why you started it, and kind of, I know you homeschool, but the age of your kids and just a little bit more about you.
Okay, so I have 3 children. They're 5, 3, and 1 years old. And during this entire time that we've had kids, my husband's been in graduate school. And so we, for the last few years of that, we were in this really neat little community with some other grad school families. And during that time, we would spend a lot of time out on the playground. And it kind of became this nice little motherhood mastermind where we would sit and just talk about big ideas and about raising our family and what we were each learning and working on. And we were very different, but very good friends. And we're, kind of would either pick up and learn what the other person was doing too, or just think it was really cool. Both happened. And out of that came, one of my friends started another business. I started podcasting because we were all learning about different things and can kind of support each other and go further. And so it's something that had been on my mind and in my heart for a very, very long time. And then just being put with these people helped it kind of come to fruition on the podcast side of things.
That is so cool. I love learning from other moms, and I think that's so great that you guys were able to have big conversations. I've shared on the podcast before that I'm not a huge fan of small talk, and I love to have people who I can really get into good and deep conversations with. And that's why I like doing the podcast, so I can talk about, bigger things and real things. So that's so awesome. You had an outlet for that with these women. And so is that why you chose this specific direction, or what led you to want a podcast about growth for women and moms?
So motherhood for me, I think I've always had it in my mind that I would enjoy it and that I would like it, and that all of the components of motherhood themselves I think are great. But I have had lots of really, really, really hard experiences that have popped up for me in motherhood. Just starting with pregnancies. Those, like my 3rd pregnancy, totally wiped me out. And I was very, 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 very sick. And my pelvis separates. It was very hard to walk. That happened with my 2nd one as well. And so when I talk about these people on the playground, they would come to my house at 8 a.m. They would get my kids out to the playground, no shoes, wearing what they were wearing the day before. And then I would somehow waddle out and then lay on the ground for all day. And then we would do a potluck lunch where they brought the food and we'd get in for nap time and then help me this out and get back out in the afternoon. So during that time, it didn't feel a lot like growing some of that time, and there were other things too. After my second was born, I contracted a very serious bug at the hospital and was back 2 weeks later with a new baby, fighting for my life with a 2-year-old at home. So, and that took 4 or 5 months for me to kind of come back from. And so I kind of had this realization that through these really hard things that felt like my life had paused, that felt like I wasn't progressing, that I was growing a lot. And I've learned a lot about resilience and about growth and about how to thrive even when it doesn't seem like you should be. Like the world tells you that you're wasting your time, or it's too hard, or whatever. There's so many messages. And so I just realized motherhood for me has been the perfect seedbed for growth for me. And I suspected it was the same. That's a universal thing, that it's really the perfect way to cultivate ourselves. And so that is kind of where the message of the podcast is. It's part sharing and learning what thriving is about and how to thrive better. And it's also sharing mother stories about how they've grown, recognizing, encouraging, and celebrating that growth that's happening in our own motherhood journeys, because everybody has their own story. It's unique, but they're powerful, and we can learn so much from each other.
Okay, I love that so much. I feel like that's something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And I've been talking to my husband about that idea of growing through motherhood, and about, like you said, it's not usually the message that we get. It's almost like, yeah, you can be with your kids, but if you want to grow, go outside of your home. There's something out there that's going to help you grow and become this amazing person. But the actual motherhood, you're kind of stagnant and you won't grow. I remember when my husband and I, this is probably 5-10 years ago, and my husband has always had positions of leadership in our church where he has had lots of extra meetings. So he'll, be gone on Sundays and then have meetings in the week and have all these meetings. And I remember at one point we had young kids and he was just gone at all these meetings. And I felt like, why does he get to go and listen to these amazing things and have these awesome leadership experiences? And he's doing all this stuff and I'm just home. And that thought, what you were just saying, hit me so powerfully. This is how you are meant to grow. You are growing through this. And it's so easy to miss that because you're cleaning up Cheerios and you're doing these little things that seem menial sometimes. But when you see the meaning in what you're doing, when you recognize that sacrifice, I mean, there is so much growth through that sacrifice.
Absolutely. I think the thing that really made it powerful for me, though, was I started every month. So I kind of created my own planner system, which after 4 years is now an actual planner people can buy. But there's this monthly page that I started doing where I would write down what my focus was for the month, what I discovered, what I accomplished, where we went, what something was that I did with my family, and books that I was reading. And I would fill that out. I would start filling those things out every month, those different categories. And what was amazing was that through one of those periods of morning sickness, when I was telling myself, well, I'm just a mom. I'm just laying here on the couch. I'm doing absolutely nothing. I'm just wasting my life. I'm so sick, like throwing up all day, every day. I went ahead and filled that out and reflected over that time. And I realized, oh my goodness, that's a lie. Those things aren't true that I'm telling myself. I actually have accomplished some things. I actually have discovered some things. I actually read some things. We actually did go places. Now, I threw up in every bush along the way, but we did go. and so as I've done that every single month, and like I said, this is a part of the planner that I sell, it changed my life because I realized I really was doing stuff and I could start to track my growth and I could challenge those. Oh, I'm just a mom, or I'm just picking up Cheerios, or I'm just changing diapers. I'm not. I'm doing other things too. I just needed to give space for it. And 2, then it allowed me, once I could see what I was doing, then I could start choosing what I was doing. I could start choosing how I wanted to grow in those areas. Anyway, so I feel like that was a really powerful thing that helped me recognize growth through some of these experiences. It doesn't just happen. Like just saying you're growing and changing for me wasn't enough because there was many lies going on in my head challenging that.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's so important. And that little reflection piece that you're talking about is huge. When we take the time to see where we were, see where we're going, plan it out and really, reflect on what's going on, that makes a huge difference. Now, I want to go back to what you said about telling yourself lies. You talk in your podcast about cognitive distortion, and that's kind of along the same line. So tell me what that means, cognitive distortion.
Absolutely. So a cognitive distortion is exactly what it sounds like. It's distorted thinking that's happening in your head. It's unhelpful thinking, and it's, yes, there are things that we tell ourselves that aren't really true, but we tell it to ourselves so much that we believe it.
Okay. And so that was what was happening to you when you were sick. You were saying, I'm not doing anything. I'm not learning. I'm not growing.
Yeah. So there's many cognitive distortions. And I think that would kind of fall into the bucket of all or nothing thinking. And so in that particular situation, that was an all or nothing thinking type of statement. I'm not growing, or all I'm doing is. And one of the ways that I was able to challenge that was by writing down which was actually happening, so I could prove to myself that no, it's not all or nothing. There are other things happening here.
Okay. Now, there was something else as I listened to your podcast that I loved. You talked about when we say that we should do something, that is a cognitive distortion. So why and what does that have to do with mom guilt?
Okay, so should thinking is something that, as a cognitive distortion, as something that is unhelpful, was something I discovered about 6 months ago. And when I became aware that I was doing should thinking and that should thinking was a cognitive distortion, it first of all rocked my world. Because for the last 5 years, my brain has been running on should thinking. In fact, I've been paralyzed by it. I sit down on my floor with my children to play, and I would think, well, I should be cleaning. Or I should be present, but I'm thinking about doing something else. Or I'm doing the dishes, but I should be playing with my children. Whatever I did, there was a should statement to counteract that. And with those thoughts, the first thing that would either happen would be guilt, or I'd be paralyzed. I'd be paralyzed in the guilt. So that is essentially what kind of leads into the guilt. That should thinking, I should be X, Y, or Z, and then that triggers a feeling. And for me, that feeling was usually that guilt or being paralyzed by that. Because if I think I should be playing on the floor, I didn't want to, or I was, but I felt guilty because I felt like I should be doing something else.
Yeah. And I can totally relate to that. I think that that's something we feel a lot as moms. I've even felt that like sometimes I'll be doing something that's really good. I'm hanging out with one of my kids and I'll think, oh, I should be with my other kid. Like you can't be in two places at once. And yet this idea of what we should do does, like you said, it brings up guilt. It makes us like, oh, shoot, I'm not doing the right thing. It just brings up all these feelings and emotions that we're not doing enough, that we're not, we're somehow failing in that moment.
Absolutely. Yes. So I guess the light bulb moment then happened for me with, okay, so should thinking is a cognitive distortion. I'm recognizing that. And then the big question was, okay, well, what next? What do I think about now if I'm not thinking in shoulds? And so, and the other thing that I also realized was not only was I telling myself shoulds, but that week I realized my kids were telling me, Mom, you should better, you should better, you should better. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're drowning in cognitive distortions over here. And so for myself, I came up with this test. It was changing you should or I should to I would like to. And what that did for me was it gave me a test. Instead of saying I should play on the floors with my kids, I could say, oh, I would like to play on the floor with my kids. And then I could say, actually, no, I don't actually like doing that. So, but I do like reading books with my kids. So I'm going to go read books. Or I should play on the floor with my kids. Oh, but there's a sink full of dishes and we have to have those dishes washed so we can eat dinner tonight. So tomorrow I know that I'm going to want to play with my kids. So I'm going to start by washing the dishes tomorrow and getting dinner ready and like in the crock pot so that I have time to play with my kids. So it kind of starts by changing slowing down and recognizing the should statement and then challenging it with the I would like to, for me, helped immensely with first level step addressing these should statements. Once I started doing that, I realized, oh my goodness, I was blocking myself into a either or choice, a good or bad choice. And I realized that, you know what, playing with the kids on my floor or the floor with my kids is great. Washing the dishes is great. Those are two good things. It's not a moral decision. I'm not making a good choice or a bad choice. And in fact, there's a million choices that I can make right now. It's not, I should do this or I should do that. It's, I could do anything right now. And so it really, once I started really unlocking what those should statements were doing in my head, I realized I have a blank canvas and I have no guilt. And that was the other thing too. It was a big win. The very first day that I started this, I got to the end of the day and I realized, oh my goodness, the guilt is gone. So it had a really fast payoff for me, being able to challenge those should statements.
Yeah, well, I can just imagine putting this into practice, how freeing that is. Because like you're saying, that is exactly what those should statements do to us. They say, you're wrong, right? I mean, what you're doing now is wrong and you should be doing something else, meaning whatever else it is that you think you should be doing, that's the right thing. And so it's really no wonder that brings up guilt for us because we're doing the wrong thing. When you're telling yourself that lie, yeah, it's like, okay, you're wrong. Well, then, yes, I feel bad about being wrong. I want to be right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing too is that your agency increases. So does being proactive. So like with my kids, I taught them this, instead of saying you should better, I would say, they could either say, I noticed that, or I would like to. And so what that would look like is they would come to me and they'd say, Mom, you should better help Laura. And you could say, oh, Mom, I noticed that Laura needs her water and I'm going to go get it for her. Or I would also encourage them, anytime they came to me and they would say, Mom, you should better grab the groceries, or you should better play a game with me, or you should better, whatever it was, I would say, oh, you would like to play a game. You would like to do that. And I would rephrase the question or rephrase their should statement for me out loud, because I realized as well, when I have people telling me what I should be doing all day, it really upped my stress levels a lot. And I was feeling pressure all day long. And I realized I could disarm other people's should statements that were being placed upon me too. So there was a lot of internal and external work happening in our home. And as I was reflecting on this, I realized my kids don't say should to me anymore. There was a chunk of time when they were yelling at each other, you shouldn't say should. So there was some work that had to happen there, but we have, over the course of probably 6 months now, kind of eradicated should talking in our home.
Okay. I am seeing so many applications here. So as you've gotten rid of it, what changes? So less pressure. What changes have you noticed in your kids' interaction and in your family atmosphere?
Well, I think there's quite a few things. But I think maybe the number one huge thing for me was, once I got rid of should statements, then my interactions could be about relationships. It could be about making emotional deposits. No longer was that voice in the back of my head saying, you should have had more rules so that your kids didn't get into the soap and they weren't pouring it all through the bathtub and making the biggest bubble bath ever. Like, you shouldn't have done that, or you should have told them no, or you should have. Now it's about the relationship. It's about an emotional deposit. No longer do I feel like I should jump in and make a big reaction to whatever they were doing, but it's, Now it's a teaching moment. Now it's an education moment. Now it's a connection moment. So I think getting rid of should statements allowed me to focus on making all my interactions emotional bank account deposits with my kids, which has changed our relationship. It's helped my kids be less jumpy and reactive to each other because they do what you do. And so I would say like the peace in our home has increased, and we have just healthy relationships overall.
Okay, I really just see how this little shift can make such a difference, because I know with other things that I have changed, I've shared previously on the podcast about, I used to always say in my mind, like, I have so much to do and I'm so, I have so many things to do, and it just would add so much pressure. And then I changed it to, I have all the time in the world. I have all the time that I need to get everything done. And it took away a lot of my stress, that little simple thing. I didn't get more hours in the day, but what I was telling myself about the hours changed everything. And so I can see how I love this idea. I love that you've given us some words too, because we don't just have to say, because otherwise it's like your kids were saying, don't say should, I shouldn't say should, but instead it's like, okay, I would like to. That's a great litmus test, because sometimes there are things that we feel we should do, but honestly, we don't want to do it. I wouldn't like to do that at all. And that's why I'm not doing it.
Yeah. The other thing too, though, is it helps like, okay, I should do the dishes. Well, okay, I would like to do the dishes. No, I don't like doing the dishes, but I like having a clean kitchen and I like being responsible. So I'm going to do the dishes, so it's not always an A to B. The other thing too about the should statements, as I become more and more aware of my own thoughts, something that I feel like has also gotten better is just being aware of my thoughts in general. So when I start to feel panic or anxious or guilt or frustration, any negative emotion that I don't like, I now pause to capture the thought and find out what is causing that feeling. So the other day I was in a situation where I had my 3 children and I was watching some other children that were also my children's age. So it was like having twins at 15 months old, and everyone was crying and it was runny noses and it was really intense. I was trying to get a car fixed, dealing with the AAA man at the same time. Like, there was a lot going on, and I realized, and I was feeling a lot of negative emotions, and I realized I was just thinking, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. Get me out. I don't like this. I don't like this. I want to get out of here. I don't like this. And after some reflection, I realized, you know what? When I keep thinking I don't like this in any situation with motherhood, I realized that it almost gives me this false sense of, well, I could make a different choice. I could go somewhere else. I could do something else. I could go work full time. When really I don't need to make some drastic escape plan to get out of my life. And so now I'm thinking, this is exactly where I need to be. And all of a sudden I can let go of the fact, all of a sudden it doesn't matter that everybody around me is falling apart, because this is exactly where I need to be. This is exactly what I need to be doing right now. And it's another disarming. And so I think for me, I started with should statements. But really any thought, anytime you're recognizing that you're feeling a lot of negative emotion, stress, anxiety, taking the time to slow down and capture that thought and recognize what feelings those thoughts are triggering and how you can challenge that thought and figure out what would be a better thought to think is really helpful. And I do that prayerfully. I honestly say, okay, God, this is what I'm thinking. How would you look at this? What can you give me? What can I think instead? How can you help me change this thought to something that will help me? And so that was one of the things he gave me. This is exactly where you need to be right now. Be confident in that. And now I can just be here. And now I have some more control, more stamina in my day for facing situations that normally I wouldn't like.
Yes. Okay. I'm so glad that you mentioned that you pray about it. I think that sometimes the tricky part comes in where we're like, you're thinking, I don't like this. And then you think, okay, you take that next step. You recognize that you're thinking you don't like this. And you think, well, I want a better thought. And you try immediately to jump to, I like this. The kids are screaming. They have runny noses. AAA guy's still there. I like this. And your brain rejects that. Yeah, you don't like
Absolutely.
it. And so it goes right back to, no, I don't. And so to find that thought, and sometimes we do need heaven's help to help us figure out, maybe, and then to figure out a thought that is both true and helpful. Something like, this will pass. This is temporary, whatever it may be. But we need a thought that's both helpful and true, not a cognitive distortion, but something that's real. So this conversation, I think, is so helpful. This looking inward, figuring out our thoughts and changing those that are not helpful to us. There's so much more good stuff that you have to give and share with people. Tell us where we can find you.
Absolutely. So my podcast website is thrivingandmotherhoodpodcast.com, and everything else can be continued from there.
Okay, perfect. I will link to that. Any final thoughts, things that you want people to take from our conversation today?
I would just say it's worth the time to slow down and write down the thoughts that you're having. And then for me, prayerfully, but changing those thoughts on paper. The payoff is huge. It takes a few extra moments, but literally I would leave everything, no matter what I was doing in that moment. As soon as I recognized that thought, I wrote it down. Middle of dinner making. And then I would take a moment, throughout the day, typically at night, pray about it. And the replacement thought would come. And it makes all the difference. It's worth taking the time to do it.
I love it. I second that. I agree. When I have used this in my own life, it does make a difference. And you just feel so much better and so much more peaceful and not trapped by the lies, the distortions in your mind. So Jessica, thank you so much for teaching us this today. I think this is really going to help a lot of people.
Well, thank you so much. It was lovely talking with you.
And thank you everyone for listening to Moms Who Know. I hope that you're seeing what this simple shift in your thoughts can do for you after listening to that episode. And I hope you're excited to put it into practice. My question for you for this week for our podcast discussion question is, when do you notice yourself saying should? Pay attention to this word, pay attention to this thought in your mind, and come and tell me about it. You can put this into practice right away, like I mentioned at the beginning. When you catch yourself thinking or saying, oh, I should do this or I should do that, what if you shift it, like Jessica talked about in this podcast? What if you shift it? What does that do for you? So the question is, when do you catch yourself saying should? And bonus points if you come and tell me about it on Instagram or Facebook at Moms Who Know Podcast. And you can also add in there what it does for you when you change it from should to I would like to. So I'm excited to hear from you guys, and I will see you next week on Moms Who Know Podcast.